let's talk first of all about hiring managers. So I have this asset in front of me. It's a list of questions with a
Mm,
list of things to look for in the answers. And we've already talked about the fact that you would select some of the questions, you wouldn't ask them all.
mm.
How do you see the process working? So let's just create a role. I don't know. Let's not be too specific, but we're hiring for something. Do you get everyone in a room first of all and say, for the role, I think these three or four questions are the ones that we should all be asking. But for this candidate, maybe these extra two. How do you see that part of the process?
Well, so what I've tried to do is label up certain questions with certain things that you can really nail into in low level detail on in the answers, or are going to give you the most bang for your buck in terms of answers. So an example might be I'll go back to the example that I used earlier, which is tell me a time where you had to manage stakeholder expectation, blah 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 blah, and those things are labeled up with risk management. It's labeled up with diplomacy. It's labeled up with communication styles. So what is important to do as the hiring manager is say, okay, these are the things that I care about. These are my most important characteristics and traits that I'm looking for in this person. And that could be from, like a personal level, or it could be a skill set level, whatever it is that you're most interested in, and ensuring that you're picking those questions. And that will give you a good foundation, but don't rely too heavily on it to be your kind of, again, that bullet point list. So when you are listening out for those answers, I don't tend to make notes, but I tend to try and listen to what sort of reaction that stokes in me, right? So if someone says a certain keyword or a certain word in the response, I will try and pull on that and maybe dig a little bit deeper into, let's say the key result here is, the answer is, I would ensure that we've done a proper risk analysis to ensure that we aren't putting certain customers at risk by making X decision, right? And I was like, okay, so you spoke a little bit about risk analysis there. Can you just tell me a little bit about how you go through that? And then you're getting into the detail of the context of their problem, and you're giving them an opportunity to apply context to their actual answer, whereas maybe they would give you a high level structure before. And that's really where you're able to detect the substance and the validity of those sorts of answers, because everybody can talk about them. You might be a great salesman of yourself to a certain degree, but if you can't then back it up with examples, structure and relevant context, then you're going to fall flat. And I think that's particularly true of technical sorts of questions as well, right? If you're going to go, maybe it's a bit more of a engineering focused answer. You might give an overview of how you craft a solution for something, but then if I've got someone, if I've got a principal engineer or an architect, someone on the panel, I would then be looking to them to say, okay, this is your time to kind of jump in and push them to can they back up that statement with both, firstly, opinion. I think opinion is important. It might not be an agreed opinion. I don't think that's a bad thing to happen at an interview. Is a bit of challenge, but as long as you as a candidate can justify why you've given that answer, it's still valid and it's still important.
Yeah. I'd like to pull on a couple of things. You mentioned that you don't take notes in an interview. And I find
Mm,
myself, if I'm doing a telephone interview or a remote interview, I take tons of notes.
mm-hmm.
But it's way more difficult if you're sitting in a room with somebody in person to take notes, because you feel like you want to have the attention on the other person. But I do always find my notes super interesting. I go back through them and there are things in there that, oh yeah, I forgot that. I remember now I took a note about that thing. There's this red flag that came up, or this green flag that came up. How do you handle that? Because on the one hand, you want to give the attention to the candidate. On the other hand, you don't want to miss stuff.
Yeah. I think if I start to take notes, it's really a preference thing. Like I maybe wouldn't be advising people to not take notes. If that works for you, then you should definitely do it. But for me, it comes back to that preparation, right? I will generally have identified three things that I want to know, and throughout the interview, I will be looking for red flag, green flag, to use your language on those three things, and I will ultimately then say, okay, yep, mental tick, mental tick, mental tick, or mental cross, mental cross, mental cross, but purely because of I want to keep the conversational nature, and that's just my personal style. It's like I want it to be a comfortable conversation. If I'm there taking notes, I might throw someone off their stride because they say, "Oh, I've given that answer. see me write it on a piece of paper or typing,
Yeah.
it could prompt a different reaction in the person than, oh, I've done something wrong kind of reaction. And that's natural, and people do that, based on body language. I might be doing it implicitly through my own kind of body language without even realizing. But for me, the most important thing is engaging in that conversation and maximizing the communication time, because that's ultimately something that I look for in every interview: is how well are we going to communicate? And maybe I'm your line manager, maybe I'm not, maybe you're working in a team that I am hiring into. It's really important to me that I'm going to understand how we're going to communicate. So for me, notes and written information, and you might do something like, you might bring someone onto the call to take notes for you, or you might bring someone, you might rotate on the panel. So if you're interviewing with two other people, while one's talking, two might be listening, one might be taking notes. Those are all good ways of doing it. But whatever it is, you've got to agree up front and ensure that ultimately, it's about giving the candidate the best opportunity to present themselves. And if you're distracting them with your behavior, then you're only shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah. There's nothing worse as a candidate, as you've just said, you say something and suddenly all the heads go down and they start making a note. Did I just rule myself out by saying something stupid, or was that the most amazing thing they've ever heard? And now I've definitely got the role, and they've all made a note like, hire this person. So you're right. The behavior of the interviewer in an interview is really important. And I agree with you, to have that easy conversation thing. And also you touched on something, if you're hiring somebody that you will manage, a big question in my brain is, can I manage you? Are we going to get on? Are you going to take feedback from me? Am I going to be able to steer you? And you need to find that out in the interview.
Absolutely. And that's really important, not just because one of the things that when I was prepping for this, I started to think a little bit about is, your own internal bias. And you might communicate great with this person, but if you go to another stage and they're communicating with someone that they're going to be working with on a day-to-day basis, and you're kind of going around the houses, getting a little bit stuck on certain questions or certain answers, or the flow isn't quite there, or the connection isn't quite there for whatever reason, that is a signal that, okay, maybe one person, either the person asking the question or the answerer, needs to adjust their style, take a different approach. And if I see that adaptability in someone and that kind of reaction to something that's not going quite right, that's if anything, it's a positive for me, because it shows that you're aware, it shows you're listening to what's going on, and you've also got the flexibility to kind of adapt your style based on the person you're talking to. And that's really important. And again, it kind of comes back to that thing of certain stock answers will get you unstuck because you're so rigid in your communication style that you've got nowhere to go when you get backed into a corner.
Yeah.